being published during the opening statements as irrelevant, improper character evidence, and argumentative.
And
Ms. Quast.
Your Honor, the photograph that we will be using of Luis Rivera is actually the picture that the state is going to be using on one of their own demonstratives. So it's evidence that I received from them. And then the text messages from the iCloud are evidence that the state turned over to us, which are statements of my client that are going to be, we intend on introducing in our case in chief. So it's the evidence we expect to present to the court. If we fail to present it later on, the state can address that in closing argument.
I must sustain the state's objection at this point, and we ought to make one, and I'm not making any ruling on what ultimately, whether they'll come in or not, but we do, you've made several comments through the course of several hearings that your client said it, therefore it's admissible. That rule actually just works one way, that statements can be offered against your client. That does not necessarily mean you can introduce statements by your client. Those are hearsay, and there's not an exception, so there certainly is a different legal standard, but I'll sustain the objection at this point in time. Let's have a jury, please.
All right, for the jury.
Everybody be seated, please. Ms. Kawat.
Thank you, May it please the court, opposing counsel, counsel for the co-defendant. Prosecutorial desperation. That is the only reason why Catherine McBanwell is sitting before you today charged with a crime that she had absolutely nothing to do with. The prosecution's relentless obsession with arresting the Adelson family has led to this day, this moment, in this courtroom where an innocent person is being accused of a crime that she did not commit. But one thing is 100% certain, members of the jury. At the end of this case, when you are presented with all of the evidence, not just the little bits and pieces from the state, you will see for yourselves that she is completely innocent. So let's talk about Catherine McBanwell. Catherine McBanwell is a young woman who grew up over 400 miles away from Tallahassee at the other end of the state of Florida in Miami. You are going to learn many things about Catherine over the next few days, one of which is that she is a hardworking woman who loves her children and just wants to provide a good life for them, her son Ethan and her daughter Kaylee. She is also a very strong woman. She's one of the strongest women I have come to know. But her major downfall is her taste in men. And at the end of this case, you are going to see that the only thing she is guilty of is having horrible taste in men. So let's start with Sigfredo Garcia, because you have to know and understand what was really going on between Catherine McBanwell and Sigfredo Garcia's relationship to understand and make sense of what really happened all the way back in 2014. Catherine started dating Sigfredo Garcia when they were just teenagers. Then, when Katie went off to college, she became pregnant with her son, Ethan. And even though it's a difficult task going to school and being a mother, she worked really hard, and she graduated with her bachelor's degree in health administration. Now, the prosecution's own witnesses are going to tell you, and Ms. Kappelman actually said it in her opening statement, that Catherine and Sigfredo were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Because even though Catherine seemed to have her head on straight and that she was focused, Sigfredo just could not get it together. If it wasn't the drinking, if it wasn't the cocaine, it was the other women. And Katie had it. Sigfredo would keep messing up over the course of those 10 years, and she would always take him back because he is the father of her children. But in 2013, that all changed. She was done with Sigfredo. 10 years of the back and forth. She had had it. So the relationship was over. She kicked him out of her apartment. She didn't want to have anything to do with him. But even though they're broken up, Sigfredo is the father of her children. That is why they were keeping in constant communication. She didn't cut Sigfredo out of her children's life. Now, a few months later after their breakup, she was working at a dental office called Sophie Dental on South Beach in Miami. And in walks Charlie Adelson and walks into her life. The second man that she has horrible taste for. Because you are going to learn that Charlie Adelson, they will describe him somewhat of a playboy. At the time he was 37 years old, single, dentist, good income, no kids. The state is going to try and make it seem like he is a millionaire or a billionaire, but it wasn't like that. He was all about fun though. And Catherine, she knew this. Charlie is not one to be shy about what he wants out of life, which is not to settle down. So even though they were having a good time and they were dating, Catherine knew this was not going to end up anywhere serious like marriage. Now, Sigfredo, he was not handling this breakup very well. And the prosecution's own witnesses will tell you that Sigfredo would follow Katie around, that he followed her once without her knowing when she was having dinner with Charlie Adelson. He was in a truck with Luis Rivera when they were watching them eating. And he actually threatened to run them over with his truck. That is where Sigfredo's head was at. Sigfredo, the evidence will show you, knew about Charlie, and the evidence will show you that Charlie knew about Sigfredo. And Charlie knew how badly Sigfredo wanted Katie back. He knew that the one driving force that was driving Sigfredo was trying to get Katie back. Now, the state got up here, and what their whole theory boils down to is they say that the Adelsons are behind this, but the only link that makes sense is that it had to have gone through Catherine McBanwell to get to these two individuals. But members of the jury, Ms. Kappelman said it to you directly in her opening statement. They have a phone call between Sigfredo Garcia directly to Harvey Adelson. So there's evidence of that communication. They don't want to highlight it because if they can show that there is evidence between Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia directly to Charlie, then their entire theory of Katie's involvement makes absolutely no sense. But you know what, members of the jury? Let's just use a little bit of common sense. Now, all of this that's going on with Sigfredo, you know, the stalking and all of this is taking place a few months before July 18, 2014. And make no mistake about it, that day was a tragic day. 2 boys lost their father, and a family lost their son. And if there is one thing that the state and I can agree on, is that July 18th, 2014 was a horrible, horrific, unjustifiable tragedy. And although nothing can bring Dan Markel back to his family and to his friends, we do all want the same thing in this case: justice for a senseless loss of life. But one thing needs to be clear, and it needs to be made clear from the very beginning. Justice does not come from convicting an innocent person for a crime that they did not commit. That is actually the opposite of what justice stands for. Now, the prosecution got up here and they told you about their case, and they made it very clear who they think is behind the murder of Dan Markel, the real perpetrators behind this crime: the Adelson family. But the Adelson family, Charles, Donna, and Harvey, they're not in this courtroom today, and they're not going to be here during this trial, because you're going to find out that the state hasn't even arrested or charged them with anything, because they don't have the evidence to do it. You heard Ms. Capleton in voir dire the past few days, already on the defenses, because she's trying to soften the blow when she was asking you, will any of you be concerned if the other people of the conspiracy are not going to be here? Because she doesn't want you to think about it, because it's not good for her case. You have to think about it, members of the jury. That is a pivotal question in this case, as to why the Adelsons are not in this courtroom. And why that is so important is because that is the reason, ladies and gentlemen, why Catherine McDaniel was charged in this case. Because of the prosecution's desperation and blinding desire to arrest Charlie Adelson and his parents. Do not check your common sense at the door, ladies and gentlemen, because common sense is going to be the only tool that you will need to see that Catherine was just a pawn in Charlie Adelson's plan to kill Dan Markel. And now the prosecution is trying to use Catherine as a pawn to get to Charlie Adelson. That is the only reason that we are here. The prosecution wants you to believe that Catherine, a young, hard-working mother of two, took money to help coordinate the murder of a man she has never met for a guy that she has known for less than a year. They want you to believe that Catherine asked the father of her kids, who she was separated from at the time, to commit a murder for her new boyfriend. That makes no sense. Any way you look at it, it just doesn't make any sense, members of the jury. So let's talk about the evidence that the state is going to bring you against Catherine McDaniel, the cash deposits that Ms. Kappelman talked about. The prosecution is going to present you with a witness who analyzed Catherine's bank records between the year of 2013 and the beginning of 2016. And these witnesses will tell you that there was an unusual spike in her cash deposits. Mind you, they only looked at an 18-month period to make this analysis. So let's talk about what the state did not tell you. And I sat back at my desk and I was listening to their opening statement. And I said, let me see to myself if they're going to give the members of the jury the whole story. And they didn't. From 2013 until 2015, Katie was working several jobs. Jobs that paid her in cash. She worked the club scene at Hard Rock down in Fort Lauderdale. She worked at Club Faith and she worked at Hollywood Live. She also worked for a liquor promotional company where they have girls go to these clubs or to other places and they stand up at the front and they promote the sales of liquor. And it was a great job. It's a great job to have in Miami because you make a lot of cash. When you work in these clubs and you're working bottled service, these VIP, she was in the VIP section, they pay her in cash. Now, members of the jury, this is not a surprise that I am just dropping on the state attorney right now. This is not coming out of nowhere. The FBI, the Tallahassee Police Department, and the prosecution knew about this. Witness Yindra Velasquez Mascaro, who was Catherine's best friend and worked with her at these clubs, were interviewed by the FBI and the Tallahassee Police Department over 3 years ago. And she told them this, and they just ignored it. And you want to know how I know that they're going to want you to ignore it? Number one, they didn't mention it in their opening statement. They just left that little piece out. But they're going to present you with summaries of her cash deposits. And their witness will tell you that all that consideration of her getting paid cash from other jobs, that's not in there. They don't want it in there because they don't want you to see it, because it doesn't fit with their case. But even without that evidence, let's just take that evidence out. They want you to believe that Catherine McDaniel was paid for a murder in cash and then she walked into the bank to deposit it, the place where no one will ever find it. That she decided to walk into a bank with video cameras and a record, and that was the plan to hide the money in the bank. Now, what the evidence is going to show you is that there's no evidence of withdrawals from the Adelsons' accounts, none of them, and there's no evidence of cash deposits into Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera's account. And why is that? Remember what Ms. Kappelman said yesterday in voir dire? Criminals don't leave their DNA and fingerprints. Remember when she said that? They want you to believe that Catherine is a part of this elaborate scheme, but she is the only one that is leaving a trace of cash deposits into her bank. That just makes no sense. The next thing the prosecutors want you to believe that's evidence, and Ms. Kappelman mentioned it, is a car, a Lexus. Now, she didn't go into the details about this Lexus. Just Lexus, because it sounds like an expensive car, right? It was a 2001 Lexus that had over 150,000 miles on it. The car that kept breaking down, because you will hear on those recordings, kept breaking down, and that she had to fix with her own money. This is payment for a homicide. But we'll go a step further. I thought the state was going to introduce this evidence to you, but once again, she doesn't mention it. Miss McBanwell actually filed paperwork transferring the title from Harvey Adelson to her, and then filed it with the DMV, so that there is a direct paper trail between her and the Adelsons. If you're involved in a homicide, why would you do that? Why would you put your name on with the person that you're co-conspiring with? It makes no sense. All these things that she is doing out in the open is evidence of her innocence, that she did not know. The next thing that they want to talk to you about, the breast implants. They're actually going to get here and argue to you that she received the breast implants in the October following the homicide, and that is somehow payment for murder. But they're going to ask you to speculate, members of the jury, because they went so far as to obtain her medical records from the doctor. And do you know what it showed? That she paid for it herself. That's what it showed, members of the jury. But they're going to ask you to believe that somehow links her to this homicide. Next, the paychecks from the Adelson Institute beginning in September of 2014. The prosecution wants you to believe that the Adelson family, in an attempt to secretly pay Catherine McBanwell for her participation in this scheme, they decided to put her on their payroll and file taxes on her behalf. That is a way to secretly pay someone if they're involved in this homicide. Now, Katie did work for Charlie. All of their own witnesses are going to tell you that Charlie was her boss. All the witnesses that knew Katie will say they referred to Charlie as her boss. And just because she didn't go to the Adelson Institute from Monday to Friday at these certain times is what their argument is going to be, they're going to argue that he didn't work. But members of the jury, they have Charlie's iCloud account. They have all of his text messages. They have all of the information from his phone. Mind you, he's never been arrested, but they have his entire iCloud account. Let's see if the state attorney's office is going to show you all of the text messages between these supposed co-conspirators. Because I guarantee you, if there is something in there that is evidence of this homicide, they'll show it to you. But if they don't, ask yourselves why. Now let's go on to the wiretaps. The state mentioned this. 2 years after the homicide, they come up with this elaborate scheme, they do, with the FBI. Now, they have already made it clear who they think the players are. The Adelsons, they have evidence that it's Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivero, and then they have this suspicion that somehow Catherine is involved. So they're going to do this elaborate plan where this man is going to walk up to Donna Adelson and hand her this note, and that this guy is going to say Catherine's name, says Katie's name to Donna Adelson. Now, what's more important, members of the jury, is all you are going to have, there are hundreds and hundreds of recordings. But you have to understand how these recordings come about. You're not going to get to hear every single phone call that was made on Catherine's phone and on Charlie's phone. So first, they only tapped Catherine's phone and Charlie's phone. They didn't tap Donna's phone. They didn't tap Harvey's phone. They didn't tap Wendy's phone. They didn't tap Sigfredo Garcia's phone. Only Katie and only Charlie. Next, they will explain to you that how these, what they call T3 calls, how they come to be, is it goes through the filter of the FBI. What that means is all these members of the police department are listening to their phone calls. They determine what they think is relevant and important. If they don't think it's important, they turn off the recording. So you're not going to get to hear everything. It's like I told you, members of the jury, bits and pieces. What they think is important. So when they make an argument, oh, this sounds funny, you are not going to have any context to any of these phone calls. But one thing is clear. They have hundreds and hundreds of recordings, and even with that, they still could not arrest Catherine McBanwell, because even they will tell you they didn't have enough evidence. It was nothing but speculation. This is where the prosecutorial desperation is just growing and growing. Okay, they've got all this stuff with the cash and this, but they themselves know Bless you. That all of that has an innocent explanation. So that's not enough. They want the thing that is direct, that can get them to put handcuffs on Katie. And they're not willing to listen to anything else that shows that she did not know. So this is what's important, members of the jury. In 2016, the prosecution arrests Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. At the same time that they're monitoring Catherine's phone, you're going to hear her recordings where she says, I don't know what's going on. I have no idea what this is all about. Let's see if they play those phone calls for you, okay? Because Catherine doesn't know that her phone is being recorded or monitored. But they're going to say, you know what, that was all a ruse. Then the prosecution decides to release to the media the warrants in this case, which basically details...
Objection, improper, argumentative.
Overruled.
Which details their case from beginning to end. Not all the things that I told you about, just the little bits and pieces that fit with their theory. So it's out in the media. Catherine doesn't run. She doesn't pack up her kids and leave. And that's because she had nothing to do with this. In her mind, she's like, there's no way that I can be accused of a murder. It's going to come to light because I didn't do anything wrong. But she was wrong because she is sitting here accused of a crime that she did not commit with no direct, reliable evidence that has her involved. So at this point, the state now is, the cases are going, Sigfredo's case is set for trial, Lewis's case is set for trial, and they want the Adelsons bad. In August of 2016, August, Luis Rivera says, I want to talk to the cops. I mean, he is facing the death penalty. They're going to kill him, okay? And they had set up this meeting, and I need you to pay attention to how this meeting was set up. They're in a room. Luis Rivera is in a room with his lawyer. They send over questions. Luis Rivera gets to review the questions with his lawyer, come up with an answer, and send it back over to them. But what is more important, members of the jury, I need you to pay attention. This first meeting is not recorded in any way, shape, or form. Jason Newland, the investigator with the state attorney's office, was there. You would think we are going to speak to Luis Rivera. We're finally going to get the questions answered, that he would even take notes. Something. And he's going to come into this courtroom, take the stand and tell you, I don't remember. You know, I can't remember the details. But one thing's for certain, they didn't cut a deal with him. So whatever he said to them wasn't good enough. Case is set for trial. 2 months pass. They're getting desperate because nothing's happening. Luis Rivera knows this. So does his lawyer. So what do? We want to talk to you again. But now the story changes. All of a sudden, he says he has information that involves Catherine. All of a sudden. So the state's attorney's office contacts the detectives and say, we have struck a deal with Luis Rivera. So we need you to go out to the Jefferson County Jail and take a statement from him. The FBI and the Tallahassee Police Department. It is offensive, members of the jury, that they went out there with no intention of recording that conversation either. They are the FBI and the Tallahassee Police Department. All they had to do was bring a recording device so that you could see for yourself Luis Rivera in action. Because the detectives will tell you, even in that statement, he can't keep his story straight. He switches from one story to the next, and members of the jury, you're going to see it for yourself. I wish I could tell you what he is going to tell you in this courtroom. But I don't know. You want to know why? He has told so many different versions of what happened that I don't know what he's going to tell you today. Ms. Kappelman made some references to what he's going to say, I'm assuming, in this trial, that it's the first time I'm hearing of it. So he's changed it yet again. But the state is actually going to ask you, this is what's concerning members of the jury. And we know this because they kept mentioning ES today. Are there small little details that they're getting the inconsistencies wrong? No. These are big details that he is getting wrong. For example, in one of his statements, I didn't know it was a murder. I found out when I was on my way up to Tallahassee, I thought it was going to be a robbery. I had no idea it was a murder. I found out on the way, all the way when we were in Orlando. That's when I found out. Then another statement. Oh, no, I found out at the house before we left that it was a murder. In fact, I am the one that went and bought the gun. I am the one that went and bought the bullets. And I actually rented the car for the second trip. They want you to ignore these things, members of the jury, which is evidence that shows you that he is a liar. Luis Rivera, a multiple-time convicted felon. Not only is he a convicted felon, he is a member of the gang Latin Kings. Mr. Rivera, the guy who even on his best day can't keep his story straight about what happened. The man who takes pleas, which you will find out because of his federal case, he just takes pleas to save himself. He has a history of doing it. This is their star witness against Catherine. Because all that other stuff that they talked about, the Prius and all, has nothing to do with her. Prosecutorial desperation, members of the jury. They are so desperate to get Charles Adelson that their belief is the only way to get through to him is we have to get to Catherine. They want to arrest her because that's our way to get to Charlie. But they were mistaken because Catherine didn't know. She doesn't have the information that they want. So now 3 years later, she is sitting here accused of a crime that she did not commit. And I'm not going to go over too much in detail because Mr. Zangané went over that plea deal. Do I even need to tell you how ridiculous that plea deal is? He is already serving 12 years for a RICO federal charge. The man who was involved with murdering Dan Markel, that is going to show you, members of the jury, of how desperate they were. He isn't even going to serve 7 years. You want to know why? Because in Florida, if there's no minimum mandatory, you get gain time. So it really isn't 7 years on top of the 12. He'll probably get 2 years shaved off of that as well. No probation. So this murderer is going to get out of jail free, probably before he's even 50. This is the deal that they cut with their star witness, and they're actually going to ask you to believe him. And what's more important, members of the jury, one of the interesting things that Luis Rivera said, and it's going to be a very important and pivotal part of this case. In one of his statements, he mentions that Wendy Adelson is involved. He says that Sigfredo told him the lady wants her kids back. Wendy, he even mentions her name, Wendy, because Luis knows how badly they want the Adelsons. So he's thinking, let me throw out Wendy's name too, because maybe I can get 10 years instead of 19, because that's how bad they want the Adelsons. He knows. And he proceeds to tell them, trying to give more details, to, add some, credibility to his story, that he goes so far to say that the day before the homicide, when they're casing his house, that they're driving down Trescott, and a woman is walking down the street with her 2 boys. He knows this from the discovery. Walking down the street with her 2 boys, and that Sigfredo looks at him and goes, hey, that's Wendy. That's Wendy, the girl that wants her kids. She's making sure that we are up here and doing the job. You would think that would be enough evidence, right? To put handcuffs on Wendy Adelson and bring her to this courtroom so she can answer questions. But no, they know that he's not telling the truth because they have records that show that both boys were at the daycare center the day before and that Wendy's house is 5 miles away from Dan Markel. They're going to ask you to say, Luis Rivera is lying or mistaken or whatever excuse he comes up with when he's talking about Wendy, but when he's talking about Katie, he's telling you the truth. That's what they're going to ask you to do, the state of Florida. Ignore him on the bad stuff of our client, of the bad stuff for our case, but believe him for everything that fits with our case. It's offensive, members of the jury. But that is why you are here. The prosecution has dug up every single piece of evidence that they could. They have dug and ripped apart Catherine McManus' life. They have gone into everything. Her phone records, her taxes, her medical records, and nothing. No direct evidence that she was involved. 0. And that's because she wasn't involved. How far are they going to go, members of the jury, before they stop? But you are here. This is why we don't leave these decisions in the hands of the government, because they are so blinded right now that they can't see the truth. This is why the system is set up, that we get you, the members of the jury, to sit here, unbiased eyes, that you can listen to the evidence objectively. Catherine McBanwa is grateful to have you here today, members of the jury, because she has been waiting 3 years for this day, for people to take a look and see what the truth is in this case. She had absolutely nothing to do with this. She did not know. She is innocent. Find her not guilty. Thank you.